Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Saturday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy. Up on the breakout map here, really continuing to just progress on here along the Yukon River. You can see some open all the way out now to, looks like a Monnik, with mostly open back to the north. Mostly open also here along the Koyukuk River, back up until you get to mostly ice up toward into the higher elevations there. And also here along the Kobuk River, we've got some open areas now, and also along the Noatak River, it looks like some open stretch, a stretch there that has some open water in it, but the Colville and Sag River is still pretty well iced in, as well as this stretch of the Yukon here, still showing as mostly ice, while the Porcupines a lot more broke up. So everything's still going, still progressing. The ice doing a slow dissolve, expect to continue to do so. And for the fire danger chart here, we've got two areas. One on the north side of the Alaska Range there into the Tanana Valley, but south of the Fairbanks area, and another one up here over the upper Yukon there. And this zone of high fire danger is higher than this zone, and mostly because of the gusty winds that are occurring in some of these areas there. 25 miles per hour, and through the passes of the Alaska Range, seeing gusts 40 to 45 miles an hour this afternoon. And that'll probably improve as winds diminish this evening and overnight tonight into tomorrow. And for satellite imagery, a lot of clouds here, especially along this band extending from, roughly Bethel northeastward into the Brooks Range. A fair amount of precipitation occurring in some areas along this boundary, with southeast flow continuing to pump moisture up to the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula, and all the way back across Kodiak and along the south side of the Alaska Peninsula. And then this system down here pushing rain up to the Fox Islands, rain to this afternoon at Dutch Harbor, and another zone of precipitation out here exiting the Pribilof Islands by late morning. That's all moved off to the west of St. Paul now. That associated actually with an upper level disturbance. You can see right here that's about ready to drop into the Shemya area with some showers, but not much of an increase in the wind. Otherwise, you can see possible clearing conditions here over the Seward Peninsula on up into the Noatak Valley, with moisture extending into the Brooks Range there and then becoming mostly very light snow on out toward the eastern Arctic coast there, with out toward Barter Island, and some gusty east winds there. Brisk wind advisories going for 25 to 30 knot winds there along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Otherwise, a mostly sunny day here along the southeast coast. Clouds in along the coastline there. Also, you can see down over Dixon Entrance with a narrow ridge of high pressure right along the coastline there, and then a thermal trough here associated with an upper level ridge sitting underneath an upper level ridge over just about all of western Canada here, with good sunshine, warm temperatures there into the 70s, and some of that getting into the eastern interior, but not to that great extent. Although Chicken was a warm spot this afternoon at 3 o'clock with 69 degrees, and some areas hitting 60 here over or getting into the 60s up towards 70 toward the southern southeast coast. So not a bad day down here. Get into the rain, 0.8 of an inch falling today, with over an inch since midnight at Seward, and Mount Alyeska had about 0.8 of an inch as well today, with Port Graham seeing 0.3 of an inch, and that just south of Seldovia there on the southern Kenai Peninsula. Rain into Iliamna, showers here along the Alaska Range, possibly southern Kuskokwim Valley. This zone, this is a heavier rain zone. Indian Mountain picking up 0.75 of an inch of rain during the day today, while Tanana had 0.4 of an inch, so some good rainfall, soaking rains with this system, although it scatters out into showers down toward the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta area, and also diminishes off to the northeast. Out to the west, northeast winds get a little gusty, but not too bad here over the Aleutians with some scattered showers. And for tonight, trough coming southward, actually there'll be showers moving across the far western Aleutians, so that upper disturbance, and then it'll kind of slip off to the east here, and then we're left with this trough, northerly winds 15, maybe 30 miles an hour here across the eastern Aleutians, with the showers along the Alaska Peninsula, light east winds there. And Kodiak Island stays wet along the North Gulf Coast. Got a front right through here yet, but showers become pretty isolated as soon as you move inland here, with just some isolated showers along the western Alaska Range. Dry over the interior, with again those winds diminishing, wind advisory ending over the eastern Alaska Range passes by 6 p.m. And this trough also weakening, precipitation field, just some scattered showers, and then areas of light snow, fog flurries there from the Brooks Range on out to the eastern Arctic coast. And the Panhandle, look for an increase in the clouds, actually moisture starting to build right along the coastline there. That'll lead to rain over the northern areas, better chance, or a chance of rain anyway, with showers for Prince of Wales Island. Rain continues North Gulf Coast tomorrow. This system moves northward, more rain for Kodiak Island. Scattered to isolated showers over the southern part of the state, south of the Alaska Range, and then back here along the Nulato Hills. Isolated shower possible for the Kobuk Valley. Fog flurries, Arctic coast, gusty east winds continue up there. North winds continue here across eastern Bering Sea with scattered showers all the way down to the Aleutians on the east side, but high pressure out west will make for a pretty light wind day, and then that'll shift eastward on Monday. Next system pushes wind and rain into the western Aleutians, spreading to Adak by afternoon. Showers southern Alaska with a trough through here. This front, more rain, North Gulf Coast. Another wet day for Kodiak Island, all pushing into the Panhandle there. Looks like a wet day coming up for your Monday there for all of southeast Alaska, Yakutat and the North Gulf Coast. Could be a little bit of light snow up over the North Slope. And for lows tonight, for tomorrow morning, mid-40s Tanana Valley, mid-40s, lower to mid for southern Alaska, mid to upper for the Panhandle, near 40 for the Alaska Peninsula, upper teens, Arctic coast. Highs for tomorrow afternoon, 60s, maybe lower 70s here, about like today here over the eastern interior areas of the state, north of the Alaska Range. Otherwise 50s to the south, lower 50s down along the coast, upper 40s again for Kodiak, lower 40s out in the Aleutians, 60s for the Panhandle. And then the lows for Monday morning, about the same, mid to upper 40s for the southeast coast. Generally lower 40s here, southern Alaska and the interior as well. And then 30 along the Brooks Range, lower 20s there for the, or lower to mid 20s for the lows here along the Arctic coast. Milder back to the west, mid 30s, upper 30s for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, upper 30s as well. Those highs will translate into lower 40s there for the Aleutians and Bering Sea areas, mid 50s for Bristol Bay. And again, 60s, lower 70s, warmest over the eastern interior of the state. And for the Panhandle, upper 50s to lower 60s, really not much of a change. And upper 20s along the Arctic coast there. Could reach near freezing, actually, in some of those areas, with mid to upper 30s over the northwest part of the state.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, for tomorrow morning's flying weather graphic here, a lot of IFR over the central Bering Sea eastward, right in across the Yukon Delta to the southwest coast here, Nunivak Island, almost to Cape Newenham. Saw a little bit there over the Kilburk Mountains, and then the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak, all IFR coming up into southern Cook Inlet, southern Kenai Peninsula, expanding over into the central southeast coast. Good VFR though, eastern interior on down into the Kuskokwim Valley here to the Galena, Tanana area, and IFR slipping on up across the western Brooks Range into the central North Slope. Tomorrow afternoon, that kind of reorients there east to west from the eastern Arctic coast there, roughly around Dead Horse, New Ixit, back to the west, across Wainwright, and to Point Lay, marginal VFR down across the northwest coast here, Seward Peninsula, more widespread VFR now over the interior areas here, all the way down across the Alaska Range into the northern Cook Inlet area. Although there could be some marginal VFR developing again here with kind of some convection increase in the moisture right along the Alaska Range. Otherwise, IFR along the southeast coast, Gulf of Alaska, North Gulf Coast, down across Kodiak Island, still out over the central eastern Bering Sea, and some more a little farther out to the west. And for Monday morning, widespread IFR, Brooks Range, all the way out to the Arctic coast. Some of that could extend down into the northern Kobuk-Koyukuk valleys. It definitely does here across Kotzebue into the Seward Peninsula. Less VFR, west central interior, otherwise marginal developing here over the southeast. Still IFR, Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast. All the panhandle socked in with IFR, as is the eastern Bering Sea here to the Alaska Peninsula, with pretty good IFR chances all the way out over the all the way out to the west there over the Aleutians and Bering Sea. And then for the afternoon, that kind of splits in two. This persisting here along and off the coast from St. Lawrence Island, crossed or very near the Pribilofs there, down to the Bering Sea side of the peninsula. Another widespread IFR zone out to the west there, central Aleutians, Adak, Atka to Shimia. Arctic coast, part of the north slope into the Brooks Range, some IFR. IFR continues here, plaguing the southeast coast into the Gulf of Alaska with marginal VFR for Prince William Sound. Anaktuvik, marginal VFR, gradually improving to VFR during the day, as does Adigan, marginal becoming VFR. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, it'll be kind of a marginal VFR day most of the time for Sunday, as well as rainy. Windy though, VFR to start, and then becoming marginal in the afternoon. Toward evening, same forecast for Isabel and Mentasta, VFR becoming marginal possibly. Tanita, possible marginal VFR developing on the eastern entrance tomorrow afternoon, otherwise VFR. And for Portage, IFR eastern entrance, otherwise marginal. And for Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. Freezing levels, 4,000 feet or so here, covering southern Alaska, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula there. A little milder here over the interior, central interior, about 6,000 feet in the east side, 2,000 feet Brooks Range on up. And also out here over the southwest Aleutians, with roughly 6,000 to 8,000 feet holding over the southeast coast. Icing threats tomorrow could be some considerable moderate rime icing here for the northern panhandle, eastern North Gulf Coast, Yakutat to Cape Yakataga, and maybe western Prince William Sound. Otherwise, the rest of this zone here will be light to isolated moderate rime icing, maybe a little bit here over the Yukon Delta. Jet stream trough extending from actually the Arctic here, the Chukchi Sea, southward to this bigger low southwest of Kodiak. Jet coming around kind of splits right through here, one branch 40 knots south central Alaska, 80 knots diminishing as it slams into this western North American ridge there over Canada, and kind of a northwest flow here coming into the Aleutians. 9,000 feet, easterlies 20-25, increasing to 40 knots along the southeast coast, 30 knots over the inland areas, turning northeast 25 Kodiak, and 20 to 35 out over the Aleutians. And for 3,000 feet, easterly flow here through the interior, maybe up to 20-25 knots, light southern Alaska, 10 knots, become 25 knots on the central Arctic coast, northerly flow in the Bering Sea, 20 to 30 knots, and southeast winds on the increase, this thing lifting northward through the day, so increasing winds North Gulf Coast and across the panhandle. Turbulence, look for moderate chop coming northward with those winds along the coast of the panhandle, pushing a little farther in during the afternoon hours. And I'll be back with the marine forecasts.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, or GINA, based at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the show.
Well, Dave, it's great to be back. Thanks for inviting us again.
Sure thing. And today we want to talk about identifying burn scars. That would be the burned up area after a wildfire when the flames and the smoke are gone. We can see it if you drive by it on the roadway, of course, but from satellite, we can also identify those places on the land, right?
You know it. You know that expression, ouch, that's going to leave a mark?
Yeah.
After you bang your knee getting out of the car. You go,
oh, yeah.
Well, the ouch, it's going to leave a mark, that also applies to the landscape. Whenever a wildfire ravages through, it's going to leave a mark on the landscape. After a wildfire burns out, this is called a burn scar.
Okay.
And you can ask yourself, well, that's interesting. We can see a burn scar from space. Right. Then the question is, well, why does that matter?
Okay.
Who cares?
Yeah, fire's over.
Right, the fire is over. We don't need to worry about this anymore. It turns out you kind of do, because burn scars are important. There's this old rule of thumb in the weather business that flood follows fire.
Okay.
The action of the fire in killing off the vegetation, in baking, kiln drying the landscape a little bit, can hinder the land's ability to absorb rainfall. So if you have a fire, especially if it's in complex mountainous terrain.
Right.
This is classic in California. It can happen somewhat in Alaska too. You get a wildfire in steep, hilly, or mountainous terrain, rips off all the vegetation off the landscape. Then 6 months later, there's a big rainstorm, and you get a flash flood in that area. So flood can follow fire. That's why you got to know where the burn scars are. Secondly, a fire needs fuel to maintain itself. So if there's an old burn scar left over from a year or two ago, and then another summer later here in Alaska in the interior, it's a big wildfire season, if there's a fire advancing toward an old burn scar, well, guess what? That old burn scar is going to be tougher terrain for that new fire to get through because there's not as much fuel in that burn scar. So they almost act like a natural fire break. These are a couple of reasons why you need to know where those burn scars are. Alaska Fire Service has limited resources. They want to put their people and their equipment where it does the most good. They need to know, well, this is an area where there's no burn scar. We better put people here because that fire could really run.
So really important for weather forecasters and fire weather forecasters for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But then how do weather satellites actually detect those burn scars?
Ah, good question.
Thanks.
Well, let's turn the Wayback Machine to the summer of 2015. That was a very active year. Got a picture here taken up in the White Mountains. This is one of the fires in progress that summer, and if you look real close, you can almost see Frodo throwing the ring into the volcano there. So that's quite the vision. Well, let's look at a visible image. Here we are in Alaska's interior. This is before the fires got out of the cage in early summer of 2015. Let's zoom into the western interior here. Again, this is a weather satellite image of visible light, what the human eye can see. We're into the middle reach of the Yukon Valley there in the western interior, Galena area. And this is just a beautiful visible day. Nothing much going on. It's in early June before the fires really got active. But then in 2015, the fires got loose, especially in that western interior. Here's another image. The same satellite pass as that visible image, but now we're not quite looking at visible light.
Very different.
There's a slight change here. This image incorporates something called the veggie band. 0.86 micron wavelength. The micron's very tiny, but that wavelength responds to vegetation, the chlorophyll. So trees and grasses reflect that part of the electromagnetic spectrum back to the satellite. And so the satellite sees that. When signal comes at that wavelength to the satellite, we know, there's some vegetation growing there. This is great. You can identify coastlines so easily because you go from vegetation to water. Turns out if you have a burn scar, guess what? You burned away the vegetation, so that's going to show up. We're going to do a before, during, and after kind of look here. And so we're looking at before. So in this image, we got a lot of green out there. That's wonderful. Another fun thing about this kind of imagery is you can see down in the Alaska Range in the southeast corner of the image, it's blue. That's glaciers and snow in the mountains. So this is not really what the human eye can see. This is these wavelengths are beyond human vision, but we've made them look certain colors. So the vegetation looks green. Now let's look at that same kind of satellite recipe, but during the fires. This is in July. The fires are loose. You can see the smoke in the middle of the image, the smearing look of the smoke, and then we can see some clouds that are white, icy clouds are blue. So this is in July of 2015. The fires are doing their thing. We're burning up millions of acres. Now let's go to September. The fires are out. The audience has left the theater. You know, the event's over, right? We're done. But guess what? Now look at those brown patches.
Look at that.
All of those places are where the fire has burned away the vegetation. So you can see where the fires were. You can add up these perimeters, get acreage burned and such. And so that's good to know. Now remember, flood follows fire, and these are also natural fire breaks. So you need to know where these guys are. In the course of the 2015 summer season, we went from before with not much burn scar in this area to just a couple months later, we can see so much burn scarring on the landscape. What's interesting too about the satellite and looking at burn scars is you realize that burn scars are the gift that keeps on giving. You can forget that a couple of years ago maybe there was a fire in a certain area, but the satellite won't forget. So in the summertime we get wildfires in Alaska, but guess what? In the visible imagery here we can see the burn scars just a little bit, but they're not as prominent as in that veggie band. But then you can't see them at all if you cover them up with snow, right?
Exactly.
So here's an image from the middle of the winter time, and snow on the ground by this recipe looks blue. Again, these are wavelengths of light that the human eye can't really see. We're getting up into the infrared, near infrared, and the way we've assigned colors is if there's snow on the ground or there's a glacier, it looks blue, kind of intuitive. So this is early April of the following year, 2016. We're just about to get into breakup. We got a lot of snow on the ground, and now it's all going to melt. And as the snow melts, Then you get our final image here. Doesn't this look familiar? This looks like a lot of what we saw in September of the previous summer. So this is the spring of the next year. The fires themselves might not have overwintered, they're gone, but the fire scar does. And as the snow melts away, and then you have break up, and then you have green up, whenever the leaves come out, the grass comes back, except in the burned areas, they're having a tough time because everything got burned off the previous year. So you can see these scars even the next summer, multiple years. It depends on what kind of vegetation there is. You know, some of the tussocky tundra grasses, they'll grow back really quick, but to get a forest to come back, that'll take much longer. So these burn scars, eventually the landscape will fill in the burn scar. It will heal itself, if you want to use that metaphor. But for the next few years, you can still keep track of these on satellite. And again, the reason we want to do that is that the burn scar can facilitate a flood, and it can act like a fire break. So there you are, the
Fascinating tools. So if you're a weather satellite and you're looking at my bowl of vegetables here, you might be able to pick out which one's the pea, which one's the tomato, and which one's the carrot, and apply that information precisely to whatever it is you're working on there. That is really fascinating stuff, that we have that capability from so high above the planet Earth, and Alaska for that matter.
Yep, eat your veggies.
Yes, definitely. I think I will. I'm hungry. Thanks so much for joining us again, Eric, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We'll see you right here next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis, this western edge through here has actually moved a little to the west from what it was yesterday, and slowly melting this zone right through here, the heavier ice. And that's going to continue for the next several days. No big changes, just a gradual melting of whatever's left here, and then possibly a further retreat to the west of that western ice edge. Onto the coastal water forecast here for the southeast coast. On the south coast for tomorrow, smoke craft advisory south to southeast 25 knots, 7-foot seas. A little bit stronger, 25 to 30 knots on the north coast, and Lynn Canal south 20, southeast 20, gust 35, gale force gusts for Stevens Passage, southeast 20 for Clarence Strait, 4-foot seas. And then for Monday, those pick up to 30 knots there for Clarence Strait. Out of the southeast, southerlies 20 knots for the remainder of the inside waters. Gales along the coast here, that front pushing in the afternoon, or actually throughout the day, probably in the morning or late morning. Anyway, gales, southerly gales here for all of the southeast coast, up southeast, up north, and 12 to 13-foot seas. East winds 30 knots tomorrow, all along the North Gulf Coast, across the Barren Islands, with seas 8 to 9 feet, and northeast 25, Kamishak Bay, southern Cook Inlet, falling back to 20 knots here from the northeast for northern Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound, with seas up to 6 feet in the Sound. And for the Monday forecast, eastern North Gulf Coast here, gale warnings out, minimum gale southeast 35, seas 12 feet, east 20 for Prince William Sound with 5-foot seas. 30-knot winds for the western North Gulf Coast, 25 out of the northeast Barren Islands, becoming north there for Kamishak Bay, and southern Cook Inlet, both at 25 knots with 7-foot seas, northeast 20 at 5-foot seas for northern Cook Inlet. East side of Kodiak here, east at 20, small craft advisories for Shelikof Strait, small craft advisory Sitkinak to Castle Cape, and then north to northeasterlies at 20 knots for the Alaska Peninsula, northeast 15 with just 2-foot seas for Bristol Bay. Those swing around to the northwest at 20 for Bristol Bay on Monday. Otherwise, Bering Sea side of the peninsula, west 25, south side northwest at 30. Castle Cape to Sitkinak, those will drop down to 20 knots out of the northwest. Small craft advisories now on the east side of Kodiak Island. North winds 25, 10-foot seas, coming down to 20 knots for Shelikof Strait. Out in the Aleutians, west-northwest, 15 to 20 out there tomorrow with 6 to 8-foot seas. Central Aleutians, northwest 20, and north to northwest 20 to maybe 25 knots, especially south of Unalaska Island. That's where the winds are forecast to be the strongest with 5 to 8-foot seas. And for Monday, northwest 25 to 30, a little bit of a pickup in the winds there with 8 to 9-foot seas. 8 Akanatka, westerlies 20 knots. And that next system sliding into the western Aleutians will make for south to southeast winds at about 30 knots with 8 to 10-foot seas. Southwest coast, north of Nunivak Island, 25 knots for small craft advisories, 25 knots small crafts also for the Perbilofs, otherwise 20 knots everywhere else. And the outlook for Monday, St. Lawrence Island now up to 25 knots, but just 15 in Norton Sound. Northwest winds along the southwest coast, 20 to 25 knots there with 6 to 7 foot seas. 20 knot northwest winds for the Perbilofs back to St. Matthew Island. Up along the Arctic coast, pretty uniform here. East, 25 knots. Brisk wind advisories here all the way to the central coast, and those become small craft advisories with the open water there, all the way down to Cape Thompson with 30 knot winds here from Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson, then south there to the Bering Strait, northeast 20. And those will pick up to 25 knots, so small craft advisories here from Wales all the way up the west side of the Arctic coast. Brisk wind advisories continue, central and east side, 25 to 30 knots still out of the east. And for tonight, this area of rain will begin to diminish, push northwestward, become a little more showery and lighter with, could be mixed with snow, especially any higher elevations, and north slope on out will be flurries with fog, scattered showers Yukon Delta, rain continues Kodiak Island, North Gulf Coast, showers and breezy out over the central eastern Aleutians, and increasing clouds for the Panhandle will lead to chance of rain in the north, rain again along the North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, rain, and showers now southern southeast coast, especially around Prince of Wales Island. Showers and breezy eastern Aleutians to eastern Bering Sea, shifts eastward on Monday with another front coming up. More rain for the North Gulf Coast, rain for the Panhandle, rain for Kodiak Island, showers southern Alaska.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.